welcome to Addicted to Murder. This is Courtney, licensed professional counselor with over a decade of experience.
And this is Trisha, and when I was little, I looked for ick nights all over the schoolyard.
Ick nights. I'm going to guess fairies?
No,
No.
they are a footprint that has been fossilized.
Ah.
It's like dinosaur footprints.
Got it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, we're back for part 2 of the Sunset Killers.
We are. And look at us. We're even on schedule.
We are. Woohoo! Before we get into the...
I was just going to say time management skills. We have them sometimes.
Yeah, it's harder than one thinks. All right, so why don't we... Oh, Courtney has a question.
I do. It's my question today.
Okay.
And I found some really fun, ridiculous ones.
Okay.
So I'm excited. So the question today for you, Trisha, is if animals could talk, who do you think would be the meanest?
Well, did you listen to our book club book?
No.
Okay, well, going off of that, I would say dolphins.
Oh, okay. Why dolphins?
Because they're so smart. And, I mean, they do... I mean, they're like, and maybe orcas too, you know, they do play with their food before they kill it. And they kind of get like this gang mentality, it seems like, with their pods. And, no.
Yeah, you think they would just be like dropping insults and everything?
Yeah, after we're listening to Starter Villain or reading, whatever, for book club. And the dolphins definitely have a part in how they, you know. So if that were true, then the dolphins are the biggest buttholes.
Got it. Okay, I can see that.
What do you think?
Oh, I was thinking honey badgers. Because they don't take crap from anybody and, like, go out of their way to attack other animals for fun.
And I don't know if it was a honey badger, but, like, on those Gods Must Be Crazy movies, there was a badger, and that said that once they bite, they don't let go. But I don't know if it was a honey badger.
I don't know. I was reading this article about this honey badger at this zoo who they had to like dig down and put like a 12-foot deep like concrete barrier because the honey badger kept digging through into the lion's den and then trying to attack the lions.
Dude, no fear.
Nope, none at all. Does not care what anyone thinks.
I'm curious what other people out there think.
Yeah. Please throw us your
thoughts.
Yeah. Email us.
Or Instagram us.
Yeah. It's been a while since we plugged our socials.
Yeah, and I mean, the TikTok was gone for an hour and now it's back, but we don't go on there, so don't even bother. I think we have an account, but we don't do anything with it.
Yeah, so email us, Instagram message us, Facebook us.
addictedtomurderpodcast@gmail.com.
Except for, yes, that's our email.
Our email.
And then Addicted to Murder Podcast is our Facebook handle, and Addicted to M Podcast is our Instagram.
Yes, ma'am. Well, let's recap last week, Courtney.
All right. So, last week we focused on the female half of the partnership known as the Sunset Killers, Carol Bundy, and we learned about her early rejection by her mother, experiences of physical and sexual abuse, and then we talked about how she learned to use sex as a tool to connect with men and was always looking for the love and acceptance that she just didn't get as a child. So she had a long affair with a married man named Jack, who swindled her out of a lot of money and then was left heartbroken when things didn't work out.
Yes. Last week when we finished with Carol and her childhood and early childhood, she had just realized that, like Courtney said, Jack was not going to leave his wife for her, and she found herself at the local watering hole when Doug Clark entered to her life. Let's talk a little bit about Doug now, the other half of this duo. Douglas Daniel Clark was born on March 10th, 1958, somewhere in Pennsylvania. His father, Franklin, was a Navy man, and he was the middle child of all five. Sorry. His older sister, Carol Ann, would later recall that Doug was, quote, different. His older brother, Walter, claimed that the two of them were fierce competitors in all things, including that of their parents' affection. Doug would tell tall tales, and his parents seemed okay with Doug because he was such a pathological liar. I That was a weird sentence, but like he was so good at lying, like his parents just kind of believed him, I guess. So when Doug was 9, he got caught by his mother when he dressed up in his sister's clothing. However, his mother said Doug was a good boy who never got into trouble. In fact, she may have favored him more than her other kids on account of how considerate he was. So he did a lot of things that he wasn't supposed to be doing, but he was very good at covering it up. And then he put on this like potential facade of being a good kid when really he may not have been. So because they were Navy kids, they picked up and they moved around a lot when they would do so, it was commonplace for them to give away their toys and their books and belongings every time. So moving, of course, has its negative aspects, but with this bunch of kids, they found a silver lining. Basically, if they screwed up in school or they pissed off their peers, there wasn't much fallout because they would just move away soon after. So really no punitive action was taken when they would do bad things. You know, their parents were just kind of like up and moved again. So, Courtney, this seems like a recipe for these kids, you know, not to learn about accountability for the bad things that they are doing. What do you think so far about Doug's situation?
So, some of Doug's behaviors, particularly the lying and storytelling, and his competitiveness with his older brother, speak to classic middle child stuff. The stereotype, of course, being that middle children are desperate for attention and will act out or behave in ways to gain that attention. It is interesting that the kids were expected to give away their belongings when they moved. It suggests that the family had enough money that they could just replace items rather than have to deal with the inconvenience of having to pack and move them. And this, of course, has the potential to teach Doug to undervalue things and to kind of think of everything as disposable, including people and relationships. And like you said, he never experienced any major consequences for his actions. So he also, never learned how to form long-term relationships.
Yeah, they didn't go into detail in this book about what father really did in the Navy, but they did allude many times to the family was kind of well off.
Right.
So, yeah, easier just to give everything away and start over. Or maybe they got allowance every time they moved. I don't know. The family moved around the U.S., but they also lived internationally. They did a stint in Japan, and in 1959, they moved to Kwajin in the Marshall Islands. I know I just butchered that, but I Googled them, and they look like a tropical paradise. The islands were once property of Japan, but were seized in 1944, where the U.S. would test atom and hydrogen bombs. When Doug and his family came along, the testing had ceased. However, there may still have been missile testing going on. The atomic testing took its toll, and there were contaminated trees and grass, and the natives had higher than average cancer rates and would conceive fetuses that would not produce spines because of all the fallout. By this time, Franklin had retired from active duty and ran a supply department for a transport company, and the mom, Blanche, worked as a radio controller. The family stayed on this island for 2 years. Courtney, I believe it was Richard Ramirez, whose mother and possibly other siblings were exposed to this sort of fallout. Do you have any thoughts on the effect this could have on Doug's mental state?
Yeah, so it was Richard Ramirez's family that was exposed to nuclear fallout when they were in Texas, and that resulted in his brother having significant birth defects. I could not find specific information about how the radiation levels on the Marshall Islands impacted things like cognitive functions, but studies about radiation that is used to treat brain cancers, when given in large doses directly to the brain, is known to cause problems such as memory loss, impaired learning, and problems with executive functioning. So it's
Still
possible.
learning. Yeah. The family returned to the States and back to Berkeley, California. Then they went to India. While in India, the family was exposed to dead bodies that apparently lined the street that had passed away due to malnourishment and exposure. Based on the book, these corpses would be moved away every morning, but the next day there would be newly dead bodies on the streets. In India, a family like Doug's were elite. They had many servants at home and they could afford whatever they wanted. So it's a really stark contrast to those who were perishing on the roads from not having anything. Courtney, how do you think this lifestyle could impact someone like Doug?
So, two things. First, living a privileged lifestyle and literally being served whatever he wanted likely continued to add to a sense of entitlement and not valuing the things that he had. It would be interesting to know how Doug thought about those who were dying on the streets outside his door, whether he had any compassion for them or if he remained distanced and kind of thought of them as objects. And secondly, regardless of how he felt towards the dead, being exposed to such death at a young age would have desensitized him to it, perhaps even creating a fascination or curiosity about death and dead bodies.
We'll see that later. The boys were next sent to boarding school in Geneva, Switzerland. What a life. Can't even imagine going all those places. Doug was thought of as a sullen bully at his boarding school, while his brother Walt was popular and outgoing. Doug didn't like school. Well, he didn't like having to do assignments. He wanted to slack off. He wasn't really a discipline problem per se, but he was considered unpleasant and was known to purposely screw with other people's stuff and damage it. He always lied, and he blamed the damage on other students. Doug started to get interested in girls and pretty early on claimed to enjoy the kinky stuff. He claims to have had relationships with many girls and women, but I don't know if that's true. He was thought, to use alcohol to excess, and he was the first person that came to mind when a bicycle was stolen and then it was destroyed. He denied doing it, of course, but eventually he did become a discipline problem when he wrote an inappropriate letter to a female math teacher, which actually led to his expulsion. Courtney, any thoughts or diagnoses at this time?
I mean, it sounds like Doug is solidly on the path toward antisocial personality disorder. He has no respect for the rules or expectations, thinks only about what he wants and then does it, is committing small crimes, does not take responsibility for his actions, and does not display social skills or seem to experience many positive emotions. So he can't be diagnosed with that yet, as at this point he is still a teenager, but
Yeah, on his way.
yes.
Doug next went to military school in Indiana. Movie critic Gene Siskel is apparently an alumni of this academy. Doug was bigger and hairier than his classmates. He didn't do any better at his classes here than he did in Switzerland. He could get by, however, because he was smart and he could come up with things on the fly or write, the essay a half hour before it was due. He did football, wrestling, crew. He learned how to shoot rifles. He also played the saxophone and belonged to a gun club. Doug never really created any true friendships. He hung out in groups of kids that pretty much just tolerated him. Doug liked to talk about his sex life and how much money his parents had, and that turned most people off. Doug saw the school counselor because of his less than stellar grades, and Colonel Gleason wrote many letters to his parents describing the issues, but his parents didn't seem to care. In fact, Doug was at this school for 3 years, and his parents tried to visit him one time, and that one time, Doug wasn't at the school. Courtney?
I mean, it must have been demoralizing for a young man to realize that his peers didn't like him, his teachers didn't like him, and even his parents didn't seem to like him enough to visit. He already had difficulty forming meaningful relationships from his early life of moving around so much, but now it was continuing to be that way when he even did stay in one place for a longer time.
Do you think he was doing all this bragging to make friends, or do you think he was just bragging to brag? I don't even know if he cared if he had friends.
Yeah, I mean it's tough to say specifically.
Yeah. Doug was seemingly obsessed with getting girls to have sex with him. He would go further than most of his classmates and sneak them into his room, but that wasn't enough for Doug. He wanted to control them and then show them off to prove his machismo, that they were his conquests. He also set up a reel-to-reel recorder and secretly recorded the liaisons. He would then play them for his classmates. Doug would go to see his family on holiday breaks, wherever in the world they were, but he was thought to have been lonely, possibly feeling like he was abandoned by his parents. He may have been looking for a connection through the women he continually treated like objects. He would also take pictures of those he could and show those around. He enjoyed the notoriety his pornographic images brought to him. Any thoughts on that?
So I think that Doug may have been trying to make up for his lacking real human connections with others by, physically connecting with women, which he at least claimed to be good at. And not to mention that there is typically a lot of clout, admiration, and respect in the world of teenage boys for those who are successful at getting girls to have sex with them. And so, it was a way for Doug to try and fit in with his peers, and even maybe be looked up to or admired, kind of like you were
Yeah.
thinking earlier.
But like it, yeah, more like for them to look up to him. But I don't know necessarily that he was even looking for real friendships. I don't know. Sometimes at that point, yeah, we'll never know.
Right, because we can't be in his brain.
Nope, no, definitely not now. Doug graduated when he was 19 years old. The only class he liked was military science and tactics. His parents were now retired and living near Yosemite. Doug went and lived with them for a while. He went on to be drafted to the Vietnam War, and he enlisted through the Air Force. He wanted to get into radio intelligence because he figured that was the safest place for him. He ended up being stationed in Alaska, where he was given top security clearance and he was decoding Russian messages. He was an intercept analyst specialist. Life in Alaska was reminiscent of his time in military school, but with some advantages, such as strip clubs and sex workers being available. Doug was honorably discharged before his term was over, but he earned a National Defense Service Medal and all of his benefits. We don't know what happened. His story changed, and the Air Force wasn't talking. Courtney, is any of this a surprise to you? I assume Doug must have been fluent in Russian to get this job.
I'm not surprised by Doug going into and then being successful in the military. He had basically been preparing for it his whole adolescence, and his entitlement and his selfishness matches up with his desire to do a safe job rather than seek the danger and potential glory on the battlefield.
Yeah. After this, he drove all the way to his sister's house in Van Nuys, California. Doug bumbled around there and met a woman a few years older than himself named Beverly. Beverly did not feel good about herself, and Doug tried to build her up. The two would marry in a very small ceremony not long after. She was a bookkeeper, and the two of them bought a car upholstery business. It seemed that any time they made any money, Doug would squander it, being sure to impress upon Beverly that he was the smart one who knew what to do. Doug was a lazy husband, while Beverly would keep her end of the marriage bargain. Doug wanted to wife swap and invite another woman into their bed. Beverly gained some weight and felt even worse about herself during the course of their marriage. Doug would go out all the time, leaving his wife at home. Doug was also a mean drunk. Beverly convinced Doug to join AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and to his credit, he did stay sober for 2 years. Doug would claim that he was trafficking sex workers through his upholstery business. The business went south when an oil embargo caused prices to rise. They sold the business for just a few $1,000s. Doug then worked at a gas station and as a security guard to pay for debts. He applied for a city job and became a steam plant trainee. In 1976, 4 years after the two were wed, their marriage ended. The two did remain friends. Courtney?
Well, what we're coming to know and realize about Doug is that Doug's all about Doug and making his life as easy as possible. He grew up with servants and in a fancy boarding schools where he was essentially taken care of in pretty much every way. So it makes sense that he would marry a person he thought would be able to do the same for him.
Doug now worked at the Juergens factory in Burbank, where he operated the boiler. The job was a good one, but it didn't match, the white-collar existence he thought he was destined for. He wasn't that popular at the plant. He was a bully, and he would put others down to make himself look better. He was absent a lot from work, but for whatever reason, he was able to keep his job. He resigned in 1978, and then he tried to get his job back, but that just wasn't happening. He had burned too many bridges at work. He got a different job at the Juergens factory after being denied his old job, a graveyard shift. And one night in 1980, his car went up in flames. His window had been down and a can of lighter fluid was found on the seat. He put it out with 2 fire extinguishers. He got insurance money for the car. He would later tell Carol that his car sucked, so he lit it on fire to get the insurance money. Courtney?
I think that Doug had envisioned that his life as an adult would be one of privilege, just like his childhood. but hadn't considered that it would actually take effort on his part to make it that way. So he was looking for the easy way: easy jobs, easy women, easy money by committing insurance fraud. But he significantly underestimated the value of building positive relationships with those around him and of working hard to try and achieve some of his goals.
You mean we just can't all make a whole bunch of money by doing nothing?
Nope.
Dang it. Doug was still targeting older women who were considered to be overweight and were lonely. He would be able to manipulate them to pay for things and let him stay with them for free. He was attracted to desperate, lonely women who were grateful for any attention he was willing to pay them. Courtney, now knowing what we do about Doug and him being old enough, let's talk about diagnoses.
I am going to stick with good old antisocial personality disorder. He meets all of the DSM-V criteria at this point. He doesn't conform to social norms. He's deceitful and impulsive. He's described as irritable and sullen. He displays consistent irresponsibility, and he lacks empathy and remorse.
Do you think at all there's any NPD in there?
I've sort of thought about that, but he doesn't really strike me as much as like a narcissistic personality disorder.
I mean, they're not always.
Right.
We just see it a lot.
You do see it a lot. But it seems like he's not necessarily out for accolades and...
He just wants things easy.
Yeah, he just wants things done for him.
Although he might think he's the center of the world, doesn't meet all of the criteria or enough criteria.
Right.
Yeah.
And being, selfish and self-centered is part of antisocial personality as well.
True. Doug met Carol at a local... Oh my gosh, let me start that over. Doug met Carol at a local bar where he observed that she was just the type of woman that might be able to help him out. She was sad, sitting there depressed over her realization that Jack was not going to leave his wife for her, even after all she had given him. Doug walked over and asked her to dance. They danced and he held her close in a comforting way. She thought he looked at her with real interest and bought her a drink even. They went to another club and continued to dance. Carol wanted the night to continue, but Doug had another party to attend. He asked for her number, and a few days later he called her up and asked if he could come over to her place. Kind of weird if you ask me, but anyways, Doug came over, and even though Carol warned him she had 2 kids, he wanted to come over. After the dinner, he played with her kids, and those poor kids who missed their dad climbed into his lap and wanted to be cuddled before bedtime. After he tucked them in, he said to them, quote, "By the way, I'm spending the night with your mother." Before he left in the morning, he asked Carol for a pair of her underwear. He wanted to wear them so that he could think of her all day. When she gave them to him, he said they were actually too big, and he didn't want them after all, giving them back and ultimately humiliating Carol, who didn't want to part with them in the first place. I didn't say this, but some of the other relationships Doug had, this was like one of his tactics or whatever. He would ask them, the women he was dating, for their underwear, and then he would wear them. Has something to do with when his mom caught him wearing underwear. I don't know, or if it's a manipulation thing, but anyhow.
I mean, it's a common fetish.
Yeah.
For men and women's underwear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about like him saying, "Never mind, they're too big"?
Well, I feel like it's like a bait and switch with Carol's emotions. But it's what abusive partners do. Like, they build you up and they love bomb you, and then suddenly they act cruelly to throw you off. And I mean, Carol was kind of used to that, so it makes sense that she would fall for Doug.
Well, so that's the beginning of their relationship. Jack is still in the picture. We'll talk more about him later, but Doug is starting to, edge Jack out in Carol's minds. He's definitely at the beginning, he's doing the love bombing thing.
Right, yep.
And Carol holds value for him because, he always has women taking care of him.
Right. And she at least had money.
Yeah.
She may have given half of it to Jack, but she had money.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything else? Because that's all I got for the day.
No, I think that's a nice cliffhanger to end on. We know that they're going to become a couple, but it's not starting off very nicely.
Not very romantically. I mean, they dance. They that first weird date, they hit it off. But
right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry if this one's a bit of a short one. That's
That's
just
okay.
the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. I'm not feeling like super talkative today. I think just too much stuff in my brain, too much studying stuff. So,
Yeah, it's been a lot of ingesting of information, I think, for us
yeah,
this week.
we're brain dead. It hasn't even started yet. Dang it. That's going to be a good week. All right, everyone, we'll stay safe and then we'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.